When I think about the current time and I think about Trump versus Biden, I'm curious to know what you're going to say to this. Under a Trump administration that we had, who were our top enemies? During a Trump administration, who were our top enemies? Maybe you're going to say China, Iran, whatever the list may be from you. But I'm also curious to know what you think now under a Biden administration, who our top enemies are. So Trump administration, Biden administration, what would you say?
Okay, there's no doubt that the number one adversary the United States has had for a long time is communist China. It's an authoritarian country. They aim to be the dominant party in the planet Earth. Number two would be Iran, because the uncertainty as to whether they're going to use the nuclear weapons that they're building, and they are building nuclear weapons, and the ICBMs that they're testing, just did one here, 4 or 5 days ago. The fact is, communist China is helping make that happen. Why? Because it's to their advantage to have us distracted by other things besides what's going on in communist China. Communist Chinese are today committing genocide against the Uyghur people and others. They're committing the kinds of threats to democracy that they promised to abide by when the British signed the treaty, giving Hong Kong their ultimate, catastrophe. Number three, they're building literally military bastions all over the South China Sea by dredging up coral and building runways and arming them, things that they said they'd never do. Number four, they're threatening Taiwan. Just this past week, we ended up with the U.S. Navy freedom of navigation exercise going through the Straits of Taiwan, in which at least a half dozen, maybe as many as 10 different communist Chinese aircraft overflew that the U.S. destroyer that was going through the Straits. Those kinds of things say a lot about where they're heading. They're also trying to dominate the economy of the world. Their so-called Belt and Road Initiative, which takes basically most of sub-Saharan Africa, is dominated today by communist China.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been out there. I've seen every time you go to a major city in sub-Saharan Africa, you're looking at communist Chinese engineers, and you're looking here in the United States at communist Chinese military intelligence people coming to our colleges and university to steal our intellectual property. Much of it has to do with things like weapons, with whom we deal very closely with Israel. Understandably, the Israelis are very concerned. I mean, we've got an impeachment trial going on as you and I are speaking, where there's an impeachment trial going on in Washington, D.C., and at the same time, one of America's closest allies, Bibi Netanyahu, is on trial in Jerusalem. I mean, we have never seen in my lifetime, I was born when FDR was president, okay? We've never seen in our lifetime anything like this. And on top of it, a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic that was actually supported by what the communist Chinese refused to do, and that was tell everybody how communicable this terrible disease is. It's now mutating in South Africa and the so-called UK version of it. And we have no idea whether the vaccines that were developed in such enormous rush, Operation Warp Speed by President Trump, we have no idea if these things are going to protect us from this new mutant variant of that disease. Now, was it developed in a Chinese communist lab? God only knows. I don't know. But I do know that they did everything in their power to keep us from finding out how communicable it was, how deadly it is. And the bottom line of it is the communist Chinese are behind all that stuff. And on top of that, we've got 60 or 70 of these so-called Confucius Institutes co-located on American College University, which are teaching communist Chinese ideology. And when you look at all of those things, the soft power, the hard power, the kinds of military activities, there's no doubt communist China is still the number one adversary. Does the Biden administration realize that? The only guy I know to call would be Hunter Biden. If you can get him on the show, he's probably making America's foreign policy toward China.
So the reason why I asked this from you is the following question, because so whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden, number one enemy is the same, China. Number two enemy in your eyes, same, Iran. Where do you go from there? Do you go Russia? Do you go Turkey? Because I know Turkey is an ally, but Turkey is a little too powerful in the Middle East, and they're kind of bullying guys that are bigger than them. What do you put Russia? What do you put other people below Iran?
Well, look, I mean, what we've got to do is count on our NATO allies to stand up. And one, Trump reimposed the sanctions, the pressure against the Iranian regime, aimed not at creating a war, aimed at bringing the people of Iran to the point where they say, look, we need a regime change here. It doesn't need to be revolutionary. We just need to vote out the theocracy that's running the country, running Iran, into the dirt, to continue to maintain the enormous expenditures that are required to build nuclear weapons and the means of delivering them. Who's the number one target for Iran? Remember, we are the great Satan, but remember, it's a lot closer to Israel. And so Israel has got to regard themselves as the most likely target, if not the ultimate design. And what the United States needs to make sure that we can do is do the kinds of intellectual property investigations and research and development on the best means of deterring that kind of attack. You know, our military doesn't exist to fight wars. I mean, we need to be capable of fighting a war and winning it, but our military exists to deter adversaries from doing bad things to us, attacking our country. It's been successful at that throughout the entire Cold War. The president I was blessed to serve, Ronald Reagan, understood that. You know, peace through strength was one of his mottos. And the idea of making sure that the bad guys are not doing bad things, how about the old expression, trust but verify? That's Ronald Reagan. That's what every president needs to be able to do. Trump did it very forcefully. There's no doubt that President Trump said things in a way that I would not say them, and probably you wouldn't say them. But the fact is, if you looked at the policies, both domestically and internationally with Trump, he got NATO to stand up and start paying their fair share. He added countries to the NATO umbrella, if you will. He's built relationships in the Middle East that nobody ever thought was possible. I mean, think about Arab countries who are willing to do a peace deal with Israel. Impossible. Not so. And so what I hope is that this administration is going to follow through on a number of those things that President Trump did very, very well. And I'm very concerned because a lot of their top advisors, Blinken, Sullivan, those are the guys that negotiated the so-called joint plan of action dealing, the so-called Iran deal. And of course, America gave up billions of dollars in hard cash and then added to it billions more that allowed the heavy weight of what they were doing in terms of their economy. It allowed that heavy weight to be taken off because Communist China is now their number one purchaser of their oil. We've got to make sure that the Europeans follow through on where they started out with President Trump. Whether you like Trump or not, the fact is the things he did were remarkable in terms of protecting the American people. It extended domestically to protecting our border. Countries without borders aren't countries. Okay, so the free flow of individuals across borders is not something that gives you sovereignty over your territory. And on top of that, he rebuilt America's defenses. He got us out of an endless war in Afghanistan, got us out of an endless war in Iraq, pulled troops back from places where they'd been for, in some cases, decades. But the bottom line of it was all done to protect the American people. And like I say, deterrence is the number one objective of a strong military. Israel knows that. We know that. Does anybody else in this administration know it besides you and me? I hope so.
So if you like this little short clip from an interview I did, click over here to watch the entire interview. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.